And good morning, everybody. I'm your host this morning in for Jesse Weber. I'm Rachel Stockman, and boy, we have a lot going on. We have two major trials going on this morning. One in California, where closings continue in the so-called Hollywood Ripper case. Plus, in Tennessee, we will be back to the Eric Boyd trial, who is facing charges for the brutal torture and murder of a couple there. But first, new charges were filed in Minnesota against the now disgraced R&B singer R. Kelly. And this morning, his attorney is fighting back. According to the criminal complaint, R. Kelly met a victim when she was between the ages of 16 and 17 at a fan meet and greet. He brought her to his hotel room, paid money for her to dance, and according to the complaint, engaged in sexual acts with her. Last night on the Daily Debrief, R. Kelly's attorney, Steve Greenberg, fired back, saying these charges are prosecutorial misconduct. And then he said this. Take a listen to an interview with our founder, Dan Abrams.
You tweeted out the complaint, which I read. And you mentioned that it was an abuse of prosecutorial discretion. How so?
Well, so from what I understand, there's a 17-year-old girl who never told R. Kelly that she was 17, came to his room. This is according to the allegations of the complaint. I haven't spoken to him about it yet. Came to his room, got naked, danced for him, climbed on top of him. They never had sex, and she didn't complain about it ever. It would have been perfectly lawful under Minnesota law for them to have sex because she was 17. So the prosecutor goes out and says, well, I'm going to find some other statute that has an 18-year threshold and comes up with this ridiculous prostitution charge. Nowhere in his own criminal complaint does it say that she was paid for sex or to agree to have sex, which is the essence of a prostitution charge.
All right, we're listening to some of the statements from Steve Greenberg, who's very defensive of R. Kelly, talking about the alleged victim in this case and how he believes that this is really a case of a prosecutor going too far. I want to bring in Terri Austin with me. She joins me, a legal analyst on set. So great to have her. So Terri, let's talk about what Steve Greenberg is saying. Basically, we're going to get to this, hopefully, another part of the interview where he called it buyer's remorse. Some of these women had buyer's remorse, which I don't know if that was the smartest thing to say. In addition, he was trying to draw the line, okay, maybe R. Kelly paid for a lap dance, but he didn't pay for the sex. That was consensual, and she was old enough, or so he thought. What do you make of this defense?
I think it's a really bad defense, and one way or another, R. Kelly is going to get prosecuted for these crimes. There are just too many young girls claiming that they had sex with him and that he asked them to come to his room. So I think the prosecution is going to be able to show, and the defense is not going to be able to defend these actions by R. Kelly.
So how does it work procedurally? Because now he's facing actions in New York. He's in federal custody here in New York. He's facing actions in Chicago and now in Minnesota. Who gets to have him first?
I think one way or another, R. Kelly is going down. And in New York, actually, the prosecution is very strong. They have lots of evidence and they come after you in a big way. It just depends on, how much evidence each of these different districts are going to be able to prove against R. Kelly.
All right, it's a very interesting case, one that we've been following very closely. It was interesting to hear from Steve Greenberg. So let's continue to listen to a bit more of Dan's interview with R. Kelly's attorney. Take a look.
Yeah, it can be a defense, right? But the bottom line is that, it is still, when you're talking about the crime of, statutory rape or however it's specifically defined, the bottom line is when someone's underage, they're underage.
Well, they're underage, but it's not what we like to refer to as a strict liability offense. You still have to know they're underage. So in Illinois, the age of consent is 17. If someone is 16 years, 11 months, and they tell you they're 17 years old, you shouldn't be responsible because they lied about it. That doesn't criminalize the conduct.
Is it fair to say that up to this point, R. Kelly got sort of lucky? Meaning, I think your position is he got really unlucky, right? That this new Lifetime documentary came out, and suddenly your position is all these women come out of the woodwork. And yet, if you go back and you look at his previous trial, and you even look in 2003, when they found an enormous amount of incriminating evidence that was all thrown out based on an illegal search, you could say, wow, he got really lucky back then on a legal technicality, and now it's sort of all coming back to bite him.
Well, what I would say is that he won that case. Jury heard the evidence in the case. He won a motion to suppress. Like anyone else who won a motion to suppress, he's entitled to have his constitutional right.
That's a legal defense, true. Yep.
Right. It's not luck, it's a legal defense. And that after that point, when you look at his conduct, from that point going forward, he has absolutely not committed any violations of the law. He hasn't been with any underage women unless they blatantly lied to him and showed him fake identification. He's taken every step to make sure that he did not find himself in the same position again. And if you look at these cases, they're hashing up these old allegations. In the federal cases, they're going back under the separate sovereign doctrine, and they're rehashing old allegations. Now, I would say that's unfair, and that is unlucky. So I would say he's not lucky. I would say he's unlucky and unfair.
All right, so obviously he thinks his client R. Kelly is being treated unfairly. I think many people would disagree and agree with Dan's assumption that R. Kelly got very lucky. But I'm bringing in Terri Austin because I want you to talk about what he said in the beginning, which was this idea of there's not strict liability, right, if someone is under the age. I always thought that it didn't matter if you thought the person was 20 and they were 15 and you had sex with them, that's a crime.
In most states, you're 100% correct. In Minnesota, there is this nuance that says at 16 to 18, you can consent. So the question is really, did he know and was there consent? But you're right, most states say it doesn't matter. If you're underage, you're underage. It doesn't matter what the victim said to you, you are still guilty of statutory rape.
Is that a defense, though, to say, you know, well, she told me she was 20, I had no reason to believe she was underage, et cetera, et cetera. Can that at least be used in trial as a defense?
That is what they are using in trial as a defense, and it'll just depend on what the evidence shows. What she said versus what he said. Maybe she had some conversations after the fact with people close to her, so the evidence is going to determine whether or not there was consent.
In your experience in these kind of cases, is that an effective defense to say, oh, I didn't know?
No, it is not. And especially in most states where it doesn't matter whether or not the child, said, I am older, because it's just depending upon your age. But here, where he can argue there was consent, I think this defense is not going to work.
Well, and it becomes then, if you just think about it big picture, it becomes too easy then for men to claim, oh, I didn't know she was underage. If we don't have this kind of strict liability standard, so to speak, where, you're held accountable regardless, then men always would have an excuse, or women, or whomever.
Exactly. And here I think there are just so many women who are claiming this. And if the jury sees evidence of that, I think they're going to conclude that here he did not consent with her and she did not consent with him.
And this is just one case of many that were falling against R. Kelly. He's facing charges all across the country in Chicago and New York. Okay, we have one more clip of Stephen Greenberg, R. Kelly's attorney. We thought this was important because we've heard a lot about the charges against R. Kelly, and we haven't heard that much about what his defense that he's mounting. So let's listen to one more clip from Steve Greenberg, his attorney.
Do you worry that just the number of allegations more broadly makes it harder and harder for him to say everybody's lying?
Well, it's not a question of everybody lying. It's a question of how we interpret things in some of the cases. In some of the cases, it's people lying. There's actually 7 cases now. There's 4 in Cook County. There's the 2 federal. There's the Minnesota one. Obviously, the law of averages is going to catch up with us at some point. But, it's this sort of buyer's remorse. In many of these cases, with many of these allegations, these were people that were ecstatic to be with R. Kelly. They were happy to be with R. Kelly. And now someone else has said to them, oh, no, it was no good. Times have changed. And in hindsight, they're sort of repurposing the encounters.
But in many of these cases, you're talking about girls, not women. And when you talk about buyer's remorse, a girl can't consent legally.
Well, that's not true. In many of these cases, you're talking about women. There are the cases where they claim that he videotaped underage women. There are a couple of women who claim that he had sex with them while they were underage, one here in Cook County. She admits that she told him she was 19. She went to his trial every day. You had to be 18. You had to show identification to get into the trial. He would see her at the trial. So all of the facts show that she at least represented herself to be of age.
But you know that statutory rape, you don't have to necessarily. I mean, if someone lies, the person, even if the person did lie, is still responsible as a legal matter, right?
That's not true in Illinois. It's not true in Illinois. In Illinois, if someone lies about their age, and you should have known. So if a 10-year-old says that they're 18,
right,
then maybe there's a question. But no, it is a defense in Illinois if someone has misrepresented their age.
All right, so many things to unpack in that interview. First off, Terri, just from a PR perspective, I hadn't heard him say this before. Now Steve Greenberg is saying some of these women apparently have buyer's remorse, basically saying that they had consented to this, and then they saw these people saying, oh, wait, we don't like this guy, he's bad. So now they're saying they were raped or sexually assaulted. What do you make of that?
I think that this attorney really has a very nonchalant attitude. To say that there's buyer's remorse, he's really not thinking about the fact that these underage girls were raped, or so they've claimed they are raped. And, you know, I have a very rhetorical response to that. You know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I really believe here, when you have so many women who are making these claims, that something substantial happened in many of the cases, if not all.
And we saw something similar with Cosby, right? Where you had, and many, I mean, Harvey Weinstein's another example where the floodgates kind of start opening, one woman comes forward, and then all of a sudden you're hearing from more and more women. And this is similar to what's happening with R. Kelly. You know, his attorney is saying, well, people are trying to jump on the bandwagon. And they had these consensual encounters with him, and now they're trying to reform that to something that could be criminal, but you're not buying that.
I'm not buying it. And it's interesting, he mentioned the fact that there are these 7 different cases. And the law is different in each state, but many states have this statutory rape, where if you are underage, it doesn't matter if you gave consent. So even if R. Kelly was acquitted in one of the states where he can prove there was consent, there are so many other states that say, doesn't matter if there's consent. If you're underage, you're underage.
And like we were talking about earlier, again, that's not it's not an excuse, it's a defense. So if he brings it up in trial, it's up then to the jurors, if it does go to trial, to decide whether they believe R. Kelly that he knew that this, or he thought this person was of age at the time. Okay, this is a very interesting case. We're going to continue to unpack it here on the Law&Crime Network. We're going to be following. He's expected back in court in October. We're going to follow that. In the meantime, we have a lot more business to cover here, including 2 live trials that we're following, one in Tennessee and one in California. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break and be right back.